6-year-old Finn clutched his mother's hand, wide eyes scanning the glittering chandeliers of San Francisco's most prestigious hotel ballroom. His small body hid behind his mother's black and white server uniform, a stark contrast to the diamond-draped guests around them. Melody hadn't planned on bringing her son to work, but with only $18 to her name and her babysitter canceling last minute, she had no choice. "Stay behind this curtain, sweetheart. Don't talk to anyone," she whispered, tucking Finn into a small alcove hidden by velvet drapes. What no one knew was that this small boy possessed an extraordinary gift, the ability to understand any language after hearing it just once. Across the ballroom, a man commanded attention without speaking a word. At 36, Donovan Blackwood was a legend in San Francisco's underworld. His cold gray eyes scanned the room methodically, noting exits, threats, and dangers. Tonight was supposed to be simple, just a public appearance. Then 3 Russian men in expensive suits entered. Finn noticed them immediately. While pretending to draw, he watched them switch from English to Russian whenever no one was close. Their lips formed dangerous words: target, opportunity, revenge. The glass by his plate. "Make sure it's the one with special vodka. 20 minutes after he drinks, it will look like a heart attack." Finn's heart pounded. They were going to poison the man with gray eyes. His mother approached the VIP table, carrying a silver tray. She had no idea. The head server poured the deadly vodka into Donovan's glass, the liquid sparkling like crystal under the chandeliers. Finn slipped from his hiding place, small legs weaving through gowns and suits, heart racing, one thought burning in his mind. He had to reach his mother before that glass touched the man's lips, before the Russian men completed their deadly plan against someone who would soon change their lives forever. If you're enjoying this story, hit like and share it with a friend. Subscribe and turn on notifications. You won't want to miss what happens next. Finn lunged toward the VIP table at the exact moment Donovan reached for his drink. There wasn't time to think. There wasn't time to hesitate. The 6-year-old boy hurled himself straight into the table, his small hand shoving hard against the crystal glass. The drink flew from Donovan's grasp, arced through the air in a blink, and shattered into pieces on the marble floor. The sound of breaking crystal ripped through the polished atmosphere of the grand hall. The music stopped. Laughter and conversation died out. The entire room, filled with hundreds of elite guests, turned as one toward the VIP table, where a thin boy stood trembling beside the most notorious mafia boss in San Francisco. Expensive vodka spread across the floor, shards of crystal glittering beneath the chandeliers like splintered diamonds. Melody stood frozen on the other side of the table, her silver tray nearly slipping from her hands. For a single second, she couldn't believe what she was seeing. Her son, the child she'd warned to sit still behind the curtain, was standing in the very center of the storm. She rushed forward, dropped to her knees beside Finn, and with shaking hands pulled him back from the VIP table. "I'm so sorry, sir." Her voice caught in her throat, her face drained of color with fear. "My son shouldn't be here. I'll pay for it. I'll do anything. Please don't." She didn't dare finish the sentence. She knew who the man in front of her was. All of San Francisco knew. Donovan Blackwood wasn't a man who forgave easily. In 3 different corners of the hall, Igor, Dmitri, and Alexei exchanged panicked looks. The plan they'd prepared for months had just collapsed before their eyes because of a child. The special drink was now nothing but a puddle on the floor. They had to leave. Immediately. But they didn't dare move. Any action now would draw attention. Donovan didn't say a word. His cold gray eyes swept over the scene, taking in every detail with the precision of a predator. The boy was shaking, but he wasn't crying. The mother, pale as death, was trying to shield her child with her own body. And 3 men in 3 corners of the room, men he'd recognized the moment they walked in, were trying far too hard to look normal. Finn tugged at his mother's hand, pulling her down. He spoke in a low voice, trembling, but each word came out clear. "They put poison in his drink. 3 men speaking Russian. I heard them talking. 20 minutes after he drinks it, he'll die. It'll look like a heart attack." Melody felt the blood in her body turn to ice. She wanted to clamp a hand over her son's mouth. She wanted to tell everyone this was only the imagination of a 6-year-old child, but she didn't have time to do anything at all. Because Donovan Blackwood had heard him. He'd heard every single word. Donovan leaned forward, his gray eyes locked on the boy's face. This wasn't the look of an adult regarding a child with indulgence or irritation. This was the stare of someone who'd survived for decades in the underworld, where trusting the wrong person once could be the last mistake you ever made. He was searching for a lie, searching for fear, searching for the mark of manipulation. Finn held his gaze. The boy didn't blink. He didn't flinch. There was nothing in those green eyes but the truth. The truth of a child who didn't yet know how to lie. The truth of a child who only wanted to stop something terrible from happening. 3 seconds passed. 5 seconds. 10 seconds. The grand hall remained utterly silent, waiting for the mafia boss to respond. Then Donovan sat back. A small gesture, almost too subtle to notice. His finger tapped the tabletop twice. From behind him, a tall man with a blank face stepped forward. Kane, Donovan's most loyal bodyguard, the man who'd been at his side for 15 years. Donovan didn't turn his head. His voice was deep and low, only loud enough for Kane to hear. 3 Russian men, one near the entrance, one by the bar, one standing near the band. Take them, quietly. Don't draw attention. Kane nodded and disappeared into the crowd as if he'd never been there at all. Donovan turned back to Melody and Finn. His eyes were still cold, but something had shifted. A flicker most people wouldn't have noticed. You and your son, he said slowly. Come with me. Right now. Melody didn't have time to react. Before she could say anything, Donovan had already stood up and started walking, clearly expecting them to follow. His hand rested lightly on her shoulder. Not rough, not painful. But there was a weight in that gesture that made her understand refusal wasn't an option. She lifted Finn into her arms, held him tight against her chest, and followed the man she'd only ever known through terrifying rumors. They crossed the grand hall, moved through corridors dressed in lavish decor, until they stopped before a heavy oak door at the far end of the floor. Donovan opened it and stepped aside, signaling for them to enter. The private room was spacious and opulent, with cream leather sofas and soft golden light, but Melody couldn't take in any of it. She only felt as if she'd stepped into the lair of a wild beast, and the door closing behind her sounded like a coffin lid. Donovan sat in the chair across from her and the child, one leg crossed over the other, hands resting on the armrests with an ease that suggested this was the most ordinary conversation in the world, but his gray eyes were anything but easy. They were sharp, focused, and they didn't leave Finn for even a second. The boy sat in his mother's lap, both hands clenched around the hem of Melody's blouse. But he didn't cry. He met Donovan's gaze with the strange steadiness of a child who'd seen too much of what he never should have seen. The boy, Donovan began, his voice deep and unhurried. You said you heard those men speaking Russian. How did you understand Russian? Melody cut in at once, her voice trembling even as she tried to sound calm. My son has a vivid imagination. He's only a 6-year-old child. Please don't. I'm not imagining it. Finn interrupted her, his small voice ringing through the quiet room. Melody looked at him, her heart tightening. She'd tried to hide this secret for 2 years, ever since she realized Finn had an ability no ordinary child possessed. She'd been afraid. Afraid people would think her son was a monster. Afraid they'd want to study him like a lab rat. Afraid someone would exploit him. But now the secret was slipping from her grasp. I understand all languages, Finn went on, his eyes fixed on Donovan. I don't know why. But I understand. When someone speaks, no matter what language it is, I understand. Donovan fell silent for a long time. Then he raised an eyebrow, skepticism plain on his face. He opened his mouth and spoke a sentence in Italian, his delivery so smooth it could have been his native tongue. Finn didn't hesitate. You asked me if I know what you're saying, the boy replied. Melody's breath caught. She didn't know Italian. She couldn't confirm whether her son was right or wrong, but she saw Donovan's expression shift, a flicker lighting in those cold gray eyes. He said another sentence, this time in Spanish. You said that if I'm lying, you'll know, Finn translated. Donovan tilted his head, then spoke a third sentence. This time the language sounded stranger, full of guttural sounds Melody had never heard before. You asked what I like to eat most, Finn said, and the boy gave a faint smile. That's German, but it's different from the German I usually hear. It sounds like the way people talk in the mountains. Donovan sat up straighter, his eyes widening just slightly. A Bavarian dialect. He'd chosen it deliberately. A regional dialect rare enough that even formally trained German speakers could struggle to recognize it. And this 6-year-old not only understood, he recognized it as regional speech. At that moment, the door opened, and Kane stepped in. Donovan's most loyal bodyguard wore an expression more severe than usual. He leaned down and whispered into Donovan's ear, but Melody still heard every word in the stillness of the room. The vodka bottle's been tested. It contains tetrodotoxin, a neurotoxin from pufferfish. Causes cardiac arrest within 15 to 20 minutes. No color, no smell. If you drank it, We wouldn't have had time to do anything. Melody felt as if someone had punched her in the stomach. Poison. Real poison. Her son had been telling the truth. Donovan nodded to Kane, then looked back at Finn. His expression had changed completely. The doubt was gone. The cold, measuring appraisal was gone. In its place was something Melody never expected to see on the face of a mafia boss. Respect. The boy, Donovan said slowly, his voice softer than before. You just saved my life. Finn didn't answer, only tightened his grip on his mother's hand. Donovan turned to Kane. Those 3 men. I want to know who they are, who they work for, why they want me dead. And most important, he paused, his eyes flicking toward Finn. Why they chose tonight to act. Kane left the room and returned in less than 20 minutes. But to Melody, that span of time felt like an entire century. She sat on the leather sofa, holding Finn tightly in her arms, hardly daring to move. Donovan remained across from them, his gray eyes flicking now and then toward the door, but most of the time he stared into the empty space in front of him with the brooding focus of a man rearranging pieces inside his own mind. When Kane walked back in, the air in the room immediately grew heavier. The loyal bodyguard carried a tablet, the screen filled with images and data. Melody couldn't read from where she sat. The 3 men, Kane began, his voice flat, like someone reading a report. Igor Petrov, Dmitry Kuznetsov, and Alexei Volkov. All 3 are senior operatives under Viktor Volkov. Donovan's jaw tightened at the sound of that name. Volkov. The name cut into his memory like a blade. Viktor Volkov, the Russian mafia boss who'd spent more than a decade expanding his reach from Moscow into Europe, and who was now stretching his octopus arms toward the west coast of the United States. San Francisco, the territory Donovan had built and defended for 15 years, was the rich prize Volkov craved. Volkov wants you removed so he can take the territory, Kane continued, sliding through the images on the screen. This isn't the first time he's used a method like this. Over the last 2 years, at least 3 of his rivals in Europe died suddenly under similar circumstances. Heart attacks, strokes, car accidents, all clean, no trace left behind. Volkov doesn't like open war. He prefers to erase his enemies quietly. Melody listened, a chill spreading along her spine. She didn't understand this world, these mafia bosses and their territorial wars. She was only a server, with $18 in her pocket. But she understood the word dead, and she understood her son had just stumbled into the center of a war he didn't even know existed. Right then, Kane's phone vibrated. He glanced at the screen and raised it to his ear. The call lasted less than a minute, but when Kane lowered the phone, his face had gone pale, as if he'd just seen a ghost. "We've got a problem," Kane said, his voice tighter than it had been at any point before. "One of the 3, Alexei, got away before our team could secure him. He vanished about 10 minutes before we realized." Donovan shot to his feet, gray eyes flashing with danger. 10 minutes. 10 minutes was enough time to make a call. Enough to send a message. Enough to report to Moscow that the plan had failed and someone had interfered. "Alexei Volkov," Donovan murmured. "Related to Victor." "Nephew," Kane confirmed, his sister's son. "If there's anyone Victor trusts completely, it's Alexei." Donovan paced the room, his footsteps heavy on the thick carpet. When he stopped, he turned to look at Melody and Finn with an expression she'd never seen on him before. Not cold, not calculating, but worried. "Volkov will know the plan failed," Donovan said slowly, each word heavy as stone. "And he'll know someone sabotaged it." Alexei was in the hall. He saw everything. He saw the boy rush in and knock the glass away. He saw the boy speak to me. He paused, his gaze settling on Finn. The child stared back, green eyes wide but not afraid. "Volkov is the kind of man who never leaves a threat unfinished," Donovan continued. "He'll want to know how a 6-year-old ruined his perfect plan. And when he knows, when he understands, the boy can hear and understand every language." He didn't finish the sentence, but Melody understood anyway. She held Finn tighter, as if someone had squeezed the air from her heart. "Those men saw your son's face," Donovan said bluntly, without softening a single edge. "Do you think an organization like Volkov's will let a 6-year-old witness live? A witness who can hear every secret conversation they have, no matter what language they speak." Melody felt as if the floor had dropped away beneath her. Her son, the innocent child she'd tried to protect for 6 years, the child she'd sacrificed everything to raise, had just become a target of one of the most dangerous criminal organizations in the world, only because he'd done the right thing. only because he'd saved the life of a stranger. What are we supposed to do? Her voice shook, and tears began to spill down her cheeks. Tears she couldn't stop. We don't have anything. No money. Nowhere to go. I'm just a server. How can I protect my son from people like that? Donovan looked at her, and for the first time tonight, there was something in his gray eyes that wasn't coldness or calculation. A brief flicker of warmth, if only for a moment. You and your son are under my protection, he said, his voice firm as an oath. From this moment on, if Volkov wants to lay a hand on that boy, he'll have to step over my dead body first. Then he turned to Kane. I want everything on her. Melody Carter, background, family, past, and especially, he glanced at Finn. I want to know where this boy comes from. An ability like that doesn't appear out of nowhere. There has to be a cause. Donovan brought Melody and her son to a safe room in the hotel basement, a place even the hotel manager didn't know existed. The room was outfitted like a small bunker, with security camera monitors, a separate communication system, and a thick steel door that could withstand even a bomb. It was where Donovan hid in emergencies, and tonight it became a temporary refuge for a waitress and her 6-year-old boy. Finn had fallen asleep on the sofa, exhausted after a night of upheaval. Melody sat beside him, gently smoothing the brown curls on his head, while her eyes kept tracking Donovan and Kane as they whispered in the corner. She knew they were talking about her son, about a future she couldn't control. Kane returned with a laptop, the screen filled with information he'd gathered in record time. Donovan motioned for Melody to come closer, and she reluctantly left her son, stepping toward them with her heart pounding in her chest. Melody Carter, Kane began to read, his voice even, like a machine. 27 years old, born and raised in Oakland, no criminal record. Finished high school but didn't go to college for financial reasons. Waitressed at various restaurants for the last 10 years. Currently employed at the Fairmont Hotel for 2 years. He paused, glanced at Melody, then continued. Widow. Husband Derek Carter. Died 3 years ago in a traffic accident. Melody felt as if someone had rubbed salt into an old wound. 3 years had passed, yet the pain still felt fresh, as if it had happened yesterday. Donovan frowned, gray eyes fixed on the screen. Anything suspicious about the accident? No deep investigation, Kane replied. Official conclusion was loss of control due to falling asleep. Vehicle went off a cliff on Highway 1. Body was found 2 days later. Case closed. No suspicion. He paused, and Melody saw something shift in the bodyguard's eyes. A dangerous glint. But there's something interesting, Kane continued. Derek Carter used to work as an accountant for Mikhailov Trading, an import-export company based in San Francisco. He worked there 7 years, until his death. Donovan straightened, his jaw tightening. Mikhailov Trading. I know that name. Yes, Kane nodded. Mikhailov Trading is a front company for the Volkov organization. They use it to launder money and move illegal goods from Russia to the United States. Derek Carter wasn't just an ordinary accountant. He handled the financial books for one of the most important branches of the Volkov empire. Heavy silence settled over the room. Melody felt as if the floor were tilting beneath her feet. Derek. Her husband. The man she'd loved, trusted, built a family with. He worked for killers. Donovan turned to her, gray eyes reading every expression on her face as if it were an open book. Your husband worked for Volkov. I didn't know. Melody shook her head, her voice catching. I swear I didn't know. Derek said he was an accountant for a normal import-export company. He went to work every morning, came home every night. He never talked much about work. I thought it was just because accounting was boring. I never thought. She couldn't finish the sentence. Donovan watched her for a long moment, then his voice softened slightly. Tell me about him. Before he died. Anything unusual. Melody closed her eyes, painful memories rushing back like a flood, memories she'd tried to bury for 3 years. Derek changed about 6 months before he died. She began, her voice trembling. He became anxious, jumpy, whenever there was a strange noise. He started coming home late without explaining. He checked his phone constantly like he was waiting for something. Some nights he didn't sleep. He just sat and stared out the window in the dark. She opened her eyes, tears already sliding down her cheeks. I asked him what was wrong, but he only said it was work pressure. I believed him. I always believed him. Melody paused, drew a deep breath to steady herself. One night, about 2 weeks before he died, Derek held me so tightly I could barely breathe. He said, If anything happens to me, protect Finn at all costs. Promise me. I asked him what he meant, but he didn't explain. He just made me promise. And I promised. She wiped at her tears with the back of her hand. 2 weeks later, he died. I thought it was just work stress. I thought he was worried about money, about our family's future. I never thought, anything else? Donovan asked, his voice gentler but still firm. Did he leave you anything? Letters, documents, anything? Melody started to shake her head, and then she remembered. A memory she'd forced herself to forget for 3 years. There was a USB drive, she said slowly. Derek gave it to me a few days before he told me to keep it very safe, not to tell anyone about it, and only to open it when it was truly necessary. I asked what was on it, but he wouldn't say. He only said it was insurance for Finn's future. She looked down at her trembling hands. I never opened it. After Derek died, I couldn't look at anything that belonged to him without crying. The USB drive was in a box of old things, with our wedding photos and other keepsakes. I put it away and tried to forget. Where is that USB drive now? Donovan asked, rising to his feet. In my apartment, in the closet, on the top shelf. Donovan and Kane exchanged a look. The bodyguard nodded, as if they'd just read each other's minds. We need to get that USB drive, Donovan said, his voice back to its usual decisiveness. Tonight, before Volkov's people get there first. 2 a.m, the streets of San Francisco were so empty they felt like an abandoned city. Donovan and Kane sat in a black SUV parked about 100 meters from Melody's apartment building, hidden in the darkness between 2 streetlights that had gone out. From this position, they could watch the entire aging 4-story building, the place a waitress with $18 in her pocket called home. Kane raised a thermal scope to his eyes and swept the area around the building. He stopped, adjusted the focus, then muttered a quiet curse. There are 2 men watching the main entrance, Kane reported, his voice low and tight. One sitting in a black sedan parked across the street, one standing in the alley by the trash bins. Both have weapons hidden under their coats. Volkov's men. They got here before we did. Donovan wasn't surprised. He'd known Volkov would move fast, but he hadn't expected this fast. Alexei must have made the call the moment he escaped the hotel, and Volkov's machine had gone to work at once. In this world, information traveled at the speed of light, and delay could mean death. The fire escape, Donovan said, his eyes scanning the back of the building, the bedroom window. Melody said the apartment's on the 4th floor, in the back. They left the vehicle in silence, moving like shadows through the dark alley behind the building. The rusted iron fire escape demanded care, every step measured so it wouldn't give them away. Donovan climbed first, Kane behind him, both moving with the smooth coordination of men who'd worked together through dozens of dangerous jobs. 4th floor. Melody's bedroom window was right in front of them, a thin curtain fluttering in the night wind. Donovan tested it with a gentle push, and the window opened without a sound. Melody had never imagined she needed to lock a 4th floor window. She hadn't known that in the world she'd just stepped into, nowhere was safe. Donovan slipped through first, his feet landing on the old wooden floor of the small bedroom, and he went still. The apartment had been ransacked, not an ordinary search, but the kind of search done by people desperate to find something. The mattress had been slit open, white stuffing spilling out like snow. Dresser drawers had been yanked out and thrown across the floor. Clothes lay everywhere. Books had been torn and tossed aside. Even sections of the floorboards showed signs of being pried up. Kane climbed in after Donovan and stopped as well when he saw the scene. He moved quickly through the apartment, confirmed no one was inside, then returned to report in a whisper. The signs suggest they were here about 4 to 5 hours ago, Kane said. Probably right after Alexei reported the plan had failed. They searched thoroughly, but it looks like they didn't find what they wanted. If they had, they wouldn't have posted men outside. Donovan nodded, his mind processing at a furious speed. Volkov knew Derek Carter had something important. Important enough to send people to tear apart a widow's apartment in the middle of the night, and important enough to keep guards outside even after the search came up empty. The USB drive. It had to hold something, Volkov feared. Donovan pulled out his phone and called Melody. She answered immediately, her voice anxious and trembling. Your apartment's been searched, he said bluntly, without softening it, but I don't think they found it. You said the USB drive is in the closet, on the top shelf. Be more specific. In a shoebox, Melody said, her voice catching. A white shoebox with Nike on it. I put it in the far corner, behind my old dresses. Derek told me to hide it well. not to leave it anywhere obvious. Donovan went to the closet. The doors had been pulled wide, clothing spilled in a chaotic heap across the floor. But he noticed something. Whoever searched had checked the drawers, checked pockets, even sliced into the closet lining. But they hadn't thought to reach up to the top shelf, where only a few dusty shoeboxes sat like worthless junk nobody cared to touch. He shoved aside the old dresses still hanging on their hooks and reached up. His fingers found a white shoebox, so coated in dust the Nike lettering was almost unreadable. He pulled it down and lifted the lid. Inside were a few wedding photographs, their colors fading. Derek and Melody, young and happy, unaware of the darkness waiting for them. A men's watch with a cracked face. And at the bottom, wrapped in a floral embroidered handkerchief, a small black USB drive. Donovan picked it up, felt its weight, far heavier than its size suggested. It was small enough to swallow, yet he had the sense it carried enough secrets to burn an empire to the ground. "Got it," he said to Kane. "Let's go." They'd just turned toward the window when footsteps sounded on the stairwell outside the apartment. Heavy, rushed, at least 2 men. "Check the apartment again," a low male voice said in Russian, loud enough for Donovan to hear through the thin door. "The boss said we have to find it. Tear it apart from the beginning if we have to." Donovan and Kane traded a glance in an instant. No words were needed. They moved for the window like shadows, without a sound. Kane went first, Donovan right behind him, the USB tucked safely into the inside pocket of his vest. They'd barely set foot onto the fire escape when the sound of a boot slamming into the apartment door exploded behind them. Without looking back, they sprinted down the metal stairs, abandoning silence for speed. 15 seconds later, they were in the SUV, tires screaming on the pavement as Kane hit the gas and tore away from the neighborhood. Donovan sat in the back seat, pulled the USB out, and watched it under the flickering streetlights sliding past the glass. A tiny object, but it might hold every answer about Derek Carter, about his connection to Volkov, and perhaps even the reason Finn had such an extraordinary ability. They returned to the safe room in the hotel basement while the world outside was still wrapped in deep darkness. Finn was awake now, sitting close to his mother, his green eyes anxious as they kept drifting toward the door. When Donovan stepped inside, the boy let out a breath of relief, as if a crushing weight had finally lifted from his small chest. Melody rose to her feet, her gaze locked on Donovan's hand where he held the small black USB drive. "That's..." She didn't finish, her voice catching. Donovan nodded. He moved to the work table in the corner, where a specially encrypted laptop sat, the one he always carried for situations like this. Kane took position at the door, standing guard, while Melody and Finn edged closer, both of them holding their breath as they waited. Donovan plugged the USB into the machine. The screen flickered for a moment, then a folder appeared, packed with hundreds of files, accounting ledgers, bank transfers, lists of names with numbers beside them, covert photographs, audio recordings, and one video file with a plain title, "For Melody." Donovan glanced at Melody, as if asking permission. She nodded, lips pressed tight, one hand gripping Finn's shoulder as if drawing strength from her child. He clicked the video. Derek Carter's face filled the screen. Melody's breath caught in her throat. It was her husband, and it wasn't. In the video, Derek was far thinner than in the photographs she still kept. His cheeks were hollow. Dark circles bruised the skin beneath his eyes like a man who hadn't slept in many nights. But his warm brown eyes were still the eyes she'd loved, the eyes she'd trusted, the eyes she'd built a family with. "Melody," Derek's voice came through the laptop speakers, trembling but clear. "If you're watching this, then I'm dead, and you need to know the truth. I'm not the man you thought I was." It felt like someone had punched Melody straight through the chest. She wanted to shut the video off. She wanted to rewind her life back to the happy days when the only thing she knew was that her husband was an ordinary accountant with a dull job and a paycheck that kept them afloat. But she couldn't. She needed the truth, no matter how much it hurt. On the screen, Derek took a deep breath and continued. "When I was young, I got into gambling debt, a lot of money. I thought I could win it back, but the more I played, the more I lost. Then one day, Viktor Volkov bought the whole debt. He didn't demand money. He demanded me. He forced me to be an accountant for his organization, to handle books no one was allowed to see. I had no choice, Melody. There was no way out. If I refused, they'd kill me, and I was afraid to die." Tears began to slide down Melody's cheeks, but she didn't bother to wipe them away. She only stared at her husband's face on the screen, the man she'd thought she understood. "But then you showed up," Derek continued, and his voice softened. "You changed everything. You gave me a reason to live, to hope. And when Finn was born, he stopped, and in the video his eyes shone with something fragile and bright. When I looked at our son for the first time, I knew I couldn't keep living like that. I couldn't let Finn grow up in his father's shadow. I had to get out. I secretly contacted the FBI. I became an informant for them. For 2 years, I gathered evidence on everything Volkov did. Money laundering, smuggling, death staged to look like accidents. I got it all, enough to burn his whole empire to the ground. Derek looked straight into the camera, as if he were looking straight into Melody's eyes across time and distance. I built something called a dead man's switch, an automatic system. If I don't enter a confirmation code each month, all the evidence gets sent out, to the FBI, and to someone else. He paused and drew another deep breath. That someone is Donovan Blackwood. Donovan flinched at the sound of his own name. He stared at the screen, his jaw tightening. I know Blackwood and Volkov are sworn enemies, Derek explained. They've fought over territory for years. If I die, Blackwood will receive this evidence, and I believe he'll use it. Not because he's a good man, but because he wants to destroy Volkov. And maybe, Derek hesitated, maybe he'll protect you and Finn. Because you and Finn will be witnesses, living proof. Blackwood will need you both. The video ended. The screen froze on Derek's face, brown eyes fixed forward with the exhaustion and despair of a man who'd known his death was coming. Melody cried, not the quiet, careful crying she'd tried to swallow for 3 years, but a broken, shaking sob that burst out as if someone had torn open an old wound and poured salt into it. She cried because she'd lost her husband a second time. The first time she'd lost his body. This time she'd lost the man she'd thought she knew. Finn wrapped his arms around her, his green eyes reddening too. Dad did it because he loved us. Right, Mom? The boy asked, his voice trembling. He wanted to protect us. Donovan stood very still, watching what was happening in front of him. For the first time in many years, he felt something shift inside his chest, a feeling he'd believed had died a long time ago. Your husband was a brave man, he said, his voice lower than usual. He planned to protect his family even after he was gone. Not many people can do that. Melody lifted her face toward Donovan through a blur of tears. The dead man's switch. Did the FBI get the evidence? Donovan turned back to the laptop and checked the files. He found the system log, and what he saw made his jaw clamp hard. The evidence was sent, he said slowly. 3 years ago, right after Derek died. Then why didn't the FBI act? Kane asked from the doorway, his voice edged with suspicion. Donovan was silent for a long moment, his mind moving through every possibility, until only one answer made sense. There's a mole in the FBI, he said, his voice cold as ice. Someone intercepted the evidence. Someone working for Volkov. Right then, Donovan's phone vibrated, a message from a confidential source he'd cultivated over many years. He read it, and his face went pale. Volkov knows about the boy. The kill order's been issued. All forces, run. Donovan stood up, shoved the phone into his pocket. Pack up, he said, leaving no room for hesitation. We're out of here in 10 minutes. 4 a.m. The convoy left San Francisco under a darkness so thick it felt almost solid. 2 black SUVs drove side by side, one carrying Donovan, Kane, and Melody with Finn, the other carrying the security team. Headlights tore through the night as they raced along Highway 101, heading north, leaving behind the city Melody had called home for 27 years of her life. Melody sat in the back seat, holding Finn in her arms as he drifted somewhere between sleep and waking. She stared out the window while the tall buildings of San Francisco grew smaller and farther away, the city lights dimming like stars going out. And with the city, she knew her ordinary life was fading too. The small apartment with the unlocked window, the waitressing job with its meager tips, the nights spent alone, worrying about rent and her son's school fees. It all belonged now to a different lifetime. Finn stirred against her, his green eyes slowly opening. He looked around and realized he was in a strange vehicle, moving down a pitch-dark road he'd never traveled before. Mom, where are we going? His voice rough with sleep. Melody kissed his forehead and tried to keep her tone steady even though her heart was pounding like a war drum. Somewhere safe, sweetheart. Safe from the bad people. Melody didn't know how to answer. Bad people. To Finn, the world was still that simple. Only good people and bad people, like in the comic books he loved. He didn't know how blurred the line between good and bad could be, that the father he loved had once worked for killers, that the man protecting them wasn't exactly good in the way the world liked to define it. She only held him tighter, as if her arms could shield him from every shadow waiting out there in the dark. Donovan sat in the front passenger seat, phone pressed to his ear. He was speaking in a low, rapid voice, giving orders to someone on the other end. Melody couldn't make out the words, but she understood what she was hearing. He was coordinating everything, preparing a place to hide, protecting them in a way she could never have done on her own. His world was made of 4 a.m. calls, and life-or-death decisions made in a blink. About 30 minutes out of the city, Kane, who was driving, suddenly sat up straighter. His eyes locked on the rearview mirror, and Melody saw his jaw tighten. "We've got a tail," Kane said, his voice stretched tight as wire. 2 black SUVs, about 200 meters back. They came in from the last exit. Donovan ended the call and looked back. Through the rear window, Melody saw them too. 2 pairs of headlights glinting in the dark like the eyes of hunting beasts. They moved with smooth coordination. Clearly not just strangers headed the same way. "Where's our escort vehicle?" Donovan asked. "Blocked at the previous exit." "They're trying to catch up, but there are at least 3 other cars boxing them out." Donovan swore under his breath. Volkov had planned this more thoroughly than he'd expected. He hadn't just sent men to follow them. He'd placed vehicles to cut them off, to isolate the target. "Can you go faster?" Donovan asked. "Maybe," Kane said, his foot already pressing deeper into the gas. "But if they've got weapons and decide to use them, just speed up." The SUV flew down the empty highway, the speedometer climbing, 120, 140, 160 kilometers an hour. But the 2 black SUVs behind them accelerated too, the distance shrinking instead of widening. 150 meters, 100 meters, 70 meters. Melody held Finn close, her heart hammering in her chest. She could feel her son's heartbeat too, fast and frightened like her own. This wasn't her life. She was only a waitress with $18 in her pocket. A widow trying to raise a child alone. An ordinary woman who'd never done anything wrong. Why was she here? In a vehicle running through the night, hunted by killers. One of the SUVs suddenly surged forward, trying to force them toward the shoulder. Kane jerked the wheel left, the car fishtailing violently. Melody would have been thrown from her seat if the belt hadn't held her back. She curled her body around Finn, a mother's instinct stronger than fear. "Hold on," Kane shouted as the hostile SUV tried to crowd them again. This time Kane didn't dodge. He steered straight into the side of the other vehicle, metal screaming on metal. The hostile SUV wobbled and lost control for a heartbeat, just long enough for Kane to punch the gas and pull ahead. But the second SUV was already closing from behind. Melody twisted to look back and caught the driver's face in the glare of the headlights, cold and expressionless, as if chasing a mother and a 6-year-old boy was just another job like any other. She knew they wouldn't stop. They wouldn't stop until Finn. She couldn't let herself finish the thought. "Mom," Finn's voice suddenly cut through her spiral. He was sitting upright now, green eyes wide, his head tilted slightly as if he were listening to something no one else could hear. "Mom, Mr. Donovan," Finn shouted, his voice sharp enough to cut through the tension. He leaned forward, pointing at the SUV's dashboard where the radio scanner was emitting a low, rhythmic crackle of static. Donovan glanced at the display. "It's just interference, kid." "No, it's them," Finn interrupted, his eyes squeezed shut as he focused. "They're talking in Russian. I can hear it through the noise." Donovan didn't hesitate. He turned up the volume. To him and Melody, it was just a series of distorted, guttural bursts. But to Finn, the words were crystal clear. "They're saying don't let us reach exit 47, Finn translated, his voice trembling but precise. "There's a 3rd vehicle already waiting there. They'll block the front. Trap us." Kane glanced at Donovan through the rearview mirror, both hands still locked on the wheel. The exit 47 sign had just appeared ahead, less than 2 kilometers away. If the boy was right, they were about to drive straight into the jaws of the tiger. "Do we trust the kid?" Kane asked, his voice tight. Donovan didn't hesitate for even a second. "We trust him. Exit 45. Now." Kane yanked the wheel hard to the right. The SUV leaned violently as it dove onto exit 45 at far too high a speed, tires screaming against the pavement. Melody clutched Finn, both of them nearly thrown from their seats as the vehicle bucked and swayed, then steadied on a narrower road. In the rearview mirror, Melody saw the 2 black SUVs shoot past exit 45 without reacting in time. They kept charging toward exit 47, where the trap was waiting for prey that would never arrive. Their brake lights flared when they realized they'd lost the target, but it was too late to turn back. Kane didn't slow down. He threaded them through side streets, constantly changing direction, left then right, cutting through quiet neighborhoods still buried in sleep. He knew how to shake a tail, knew which turns and alleys could make them disappear as if they'd never existed. 20 minutes later, when Kane was certain no one was following, the air inside the vehicle finally began to loosen. Melody let out a breath and realized she'd been holding it for almost the entire time. Her arms trembled as she loosened her grip around Finn, and she noticed her whole body was slick with sweat, even though the air conditioning was blasting. Donovan looked at Finn through the rearview mirror. The boy was still shaking, his small hand clenched around the hem of his mother's clothes, yet his green eyes were strangely steady for a child who'd just survived a life-and-death chase. "This is the second time you've saved our lives," Donovan said, his voice low, carrying something different now, real respect for the 6-year-old in the back seat. Finn didn't answer. He only held on tighter to his mother's hand, as if it were the only anchor keeping him from being swept away by the storm spinning around their lives. Dawn began to break as they reached the safe place. It was an old warehouse on the edge of San Francisco Bay, far from residential streets, surrounded by rusting stacks of containers and thick weeds. From the outside, the building looked abandoned, as if no one had set foot there in years. But when Kane parked and they went inside, Melody was stunned to see how different it was within. A modern security system with cameras watching every angle, thick steel doors that could stop even armor-piercing rounds, a living area fully stocked with beds, a working kitchen, and enough food to last for weeks. This wasn't a temporary hideout. It was a fortress built for exactly this kind of night. Melody carried Finn inside, her legs trembling so badly she could barely walk. She laid her son on a small bed, pulled the blanket up over him, then sat down beside him, not sure how much more she could take. Less than 24 hours ago, she'd been worrying about rent and the electric bill. Now she was running from an international criminal organization that wanted to kill her 6-year-old child. Donovan stood by the window, looking out over San Francisco Bay. The sun was rising on the horizon, turning the water gold, painting a scene so peaceful it felt almost false. But he knew the darkness was still there, waiting out beyond the light. Volkov wasn't the kind of man who quit. He would find them, sooner or later. And when he did, they were going to need more than a place to hide if they were going to survive. The night was quiet in the hideout. Outside, San Francisco Bay reflected the moonlight like a vast sheet of silver, so calm it was hard to believe that only hours earlier they'd been running from killers. Finn was asleep on the small bed, worn down by a day of upheaval that had dragged him into a deep, dreamless sleep. Melody sat beside him, gently smoothing the brown curls of his hair, studying the peaceful face he wore in rest. In this moment, Finn looked like any other 6-year-old, with round cheeks and steady breathing, not a witness to a murder plot, not a child with an extraordinary gift, not the target of a Russian mafia kill order. Just her son, the child she loved more than her own life. Soft footsteps sounded behind her, and Melody turned to see Donovan walking in. He carried a cup of hot tea and set it on the table beside her without a word. Steam rose with a faint herbal scent, a small act of care she never would have expected from a mafia boss. "You should rest," Donovan said, his voice softer than usual, perhaps so he wouldn't wake Finn. "I can't sleep," Melody answered, reaching for the cup and feeling warmth spread through her ice-cold palm. She looked at him, and the question that had been trapped in her mind finally broke free. "What about you? Do you ever sleep?" Donovan sat in the chair across from her and leaned back with a tired heaviness. In the dim light of the room, his face carried less of the frightening coldness she'd seen all night. He looked like an ordinary man, with worry lines on his forehead and a shadow behind his gray eyes. "Not often," he answered, short and plain. Silence settled over the room, broken only by the distant sound of waves tapping the shore. Melody took a sip of tea, letting the warmth slide down her throat. Then she spoke again, breaking the stillness. "Why are you helping us? Truly, why?" She met Donovan's eyes without looking away. "Finn saved you, yes. But you could have given us money and left us to handle it, sent us far away, forgotten about us. Why are you personally protecting us like this?" Donovan was quiet for a long moment, gray eyes turned toward the window where moonlight spilled in. When he finally answered, his voice was deep and far away, as if he were speaking to himself more than to her. "Because I know what it feels like to have no one protecting you." Melody was startled. It wasn't the answer she expected from the most powerful mafia boss in San Francisco. "My father was in the life," Donovan continued, still looking at the window. "He was killed when I was 10. A hit between gangs. Nothing unusual in this world. But after my father died, My mother. No one protected her. My father's enemies threatened her, took everything she had. She died 2 years later, not from illness or an accident, but because she didn't have a reason to live anymore. Melody felt her heart tighten. I'm sorry, she said softly. Don't. Donovan turned back to her, and now his gray eyes carried the familiar hard edge. That's why I'm standing here today. No one protected me when I needed it, so I had to protect myself. I had to become strong enough that no one would dare touch me. And then I protect other people. People who can't protect themselves. He paused, as if weighing whether to keep going. I'm not a good man, Melody. I've done things you wouldn't want to know. Things that if you knew them, you'd never look at me the way you're looking at me right now. But I've got rules. I don't touch women and children. I don't betray people who trusted me. And I don't abandon people who need protection. Melody looked at him. Really looked. For the first time without the veil of fear or prejudice. She saw a man carrying scars, not so different from her own. I thought Derek was safe, she said, her voice heavy with a deep sorrow. Stable, reliable, the kind of man I could build a life with without worrying. Turns out I never truly knew him at all. She gave a bitter smile that didn't reach her eyes. Maybe no one truly knows anyone. Maybe, Donovan agreed. A moment of silence passed between them. Not love, not the romance fairy tales promised, but an understanding between two people who both carried scars, who'd both lost something, who were both trying to survive in a world that never stopped trying to knock them down. Donovan stood, his posture returning to its usual decisiveness. I'm not planning to run forever. It's time to end this. End it how? Melody asked, worry plain in her voice. Donovan looked at her, gray eyes cold as steel. With Derek's evidence, burn Volkov from the inside out. Dawn of the third day at the hideout. The first sunlight had barely slipped through the window when the security system suddenly screamed, a piercing wail that swallowed the quiet whole. Red lights began flashing throughout the space, and the surveillance screens lit up, showing a cluster of red dots moving toward them. Donovan lunged to the control console, gray eyes sweeping across the monitors at a dizzying speed. What he saw made his jaw clamp tight. Someone was closing in, not from one direction, but from 3 at once. From the road leading to the warehouse, a convoy of black SUVs was advancing. From the bay, 2 speedboats were cutting across the flat, calm water. And from above, Kane ran in, his face tighter with strain than Melody had ever seen. There's a helicopter too, he reported, urgency sharp in his voice. Circling overhead, looks like it's searching for a landing spot. Total at least 25 to 30 men. Volkov isn't playing. Donovan stared at the screen where the exterior camera feed showed the convoy stopping about 100 meters from the warehouse. Doors opened. Men in black climbed out one by one, moving with the coordination of a well-trained unit. And in the middle of them, from the most expensive SUV, a silver-haired man stepped down. He wore a long black coat, his posture straight, his stride confident in the way of someone born to give orders. His face was lined with age, but his eyes were still blade-sharp. Viktor Volkov, here in person. Melody stood behind Donovan, holding Finn tightly against her. She stared at the screen, at the silver-haired man walking among his followers like a king moving through his army. What does he want? She asked, her voice trembling. Donovan didn't look back. He wants to be sure, he answered, his voice cold as ice. Volkov trusts no one, not even his own men. If he wants the boy dead, he has to see it with his own eyes. He has to make sure there are no more mistakes after the failure at the party. Donovan turned to Kane and the rest of his team. 8 men, including him and Kane. 8 against more than 25 fully armed attackers and a mafia boss with a reputation as the most ruthless in Russia. They couldn't win a direct fight. We need time, Donovan said, gray eyes hard, his mind moving at a ruthless speed. Kane, you take the team and hold the front line. Use flashbangs and tear gas. Slow them down, but don't turn this place into a battlefield. I need time to contact our people outside. Kane nodded and vanished through the door, the security team following. Donovan turned to Melody. You and Finn go into the safe room. Lock the door from the inside and don't open it for anyone except me or Kane. Do you understand? Melody nodded, scooped Finn up, and ran toward the reinforced room at the end of the hall. The steel door slammed shut behind them with a heavy clang, and Melody threw the bolt from the inside. Through the intercom mounted on the wall, she could hear everything happening outside. Heavy footsteps, shouted orders in Russian, then a violent blast, the crack of a flash grenade, followed by panicked screams. the hiss of tear gas, the sound of men coughing and choking, the dull thud of impact as someone was shoved to the ground. The confrontation had begun. Donovan's people were fighting to buy time, using everything they had to slow the enemy without turning the place into a blood-soaked war zone. But Melody knew they couldn't hold for long. 8 against more than 25. It was a loss from the start. Finn suddenly lifted his head, green eyes wide, focusing on the empty air. He tilted his head to one side, that familiar gesture Melody had seen so many times over the last 2 days. "Mom," he whispered, urgency threading through his small voice. "I can hear them. Their radios." Melody dropped to her knees until she was level with him and gripped his shoulders. "What are they saying, baby?" Finn listened, head still tilted, eyes closing to concentrate harder. Then his face slowly drained of color, as if someone had pulled the blood right out of him. They're saying they called the local police. They've got someone in the police department. In 15 minutes, the police will arrive." He opened his eyes and looked at his mother with fear. "They said the police will arrest Mr. Donovan, but not arrest them. They said the police will hand us over to them." Melody went still. The police. The people who were supposed to protect citizens. The people she'd been taught since childhood to trust when danger came. They were on the enemy's side. They'd been bought. Volkov didn't just have money and guns. He had the arm of the law in his pocket. Nowhere was safe. There was no one to call. They were completely alone. Finn tightened his grip on his mother's hand, green eyes flaring with a determination no 6-year-old should ever have to carry. "Mom, I have to tell Mr. Donovan." Melody opened the safe room door, and Finn shot out like a bullet, small legs sprinting through the chaotic hallway to find Donovan. He spotted him behind a makeshift barrier, a phone pressed to his ear, trying to reach someone outside. Finn ran up and yanked hard on the hem of Donovan's coat, forcing him to bend down. "Mr. Donovan," the boy yelled. His urgency so sharp, Donovan hung up instantly and gave him his full attention. "The police are coming, but they work for Volkov. 15 minutes, and they'll be here. They'll arrest you, not arrest those men." Donovan looked straight into the boy's eyes, his mind processing at a dizzying speed. "Corrupt police. 15 minutes." Outside, Volkov's men were slowly punching through his thin defenses. Inside, a 6-year-old child had just revealed that even law enforcement couldn't be trusted. They couldn't run. They were surrounded from 3 directions. They couldn't win. 8 against more than 25. They couldn't surrender. Volkov would kill Finn on the spot. They couldn't wait for the police. They'd been bought. That left one choice, a reckless move Donovan had never imagined he'd make. But for this boy, for the trembling mother behind him, he was willing. "Kane," the phone. Kane tossed the satellite phone to Donovan without asking why. Donovan caught it and his fingers flew over a number he knew by heart but had never once used. An FBI hotline. A number very few people in the underworld even knew existed, and fewer still would dare to call. "This is Donovan Blackwood," he said the moment someone answered, his voice fast, clear, and without a hint of hesitation. "I've got evidence on Viktor Volkov's organization. International money laundering, systematic murder, and most important, corrupt San Francisco police working for him. I need a tactical team at this address immediately." He recited the warehouse address with precision, then continued. "If you don't get here within 15 minutes, I and 2 key witnesses will be dead, and you'll lose your only chance to take Volkov down once and for all." He ended the call without waiting for a response. Melody stood behind him, eyes wide, unable to believe what she'd just heard. Donovan Blackwood, the notorious mafia boss of San Francisco, had just called the FBI. He'd just turned himself in to the agency he'd spent his entire life avoiding. "Will they come?" she asked, hope and doubt tangled in her voice. "The FBI has been waiting for this opportunity for years," Donovan replied, his eyes still on the security screens where Volkov's men were closing in. "They want Volkov more than they want me. They'll come," and they did. Not in the 15 minutes, Donovan had demanded. In 12. The thunder of helicopter engines tore into the sky before anyone fully understood what was happening. 5 FBI helicopters appeared over the horizon, flying low and fast like enormous hornets. They surrounded the area in seconds, and loudspeakers blared commands for everyone to drop their weapons and get on the ground. At the same time, from the bay, FBI patrol boats surged in at frightening speed, cutting off Volkov's men's route of retreat. Tactical teams poured in from both air and sea, dressed in black armor, carrying heavy weapons, moving with the seamless coordination of a war machine. The force was so overwhelming that Volkov's men and Donovan's men alike had no choice but to lower their weapons. Within 5 minutes, it was over. Viktor Volkov was cuffed and shoved into an FBI vehicle, his face gray with rage and disbelief. The most powerful Russian mafia boss had been taken like an ordinary criminal, right in front of his own soldiers. But Donovan was cuffed too. 2 FBI agents stepped in, placed their hands on his shoulders, and calmly but firmly snapped cuffs onto his wrists behind his back. "Mr. Blackwood, you'll have to come with us," one of them said. Melody watched, her heart tightening. Donovan, the man who'd saved them, protected them, risked his life for them, was now in handcuffs like a criminal. She wanted to run to him, wanted to scream that they were arresting the wrong man, but she knew it was useless. In the eyes of the law, Donovan Blackwood was a criminal, and whatever he'd done for them didn't change that. A woman stepped out of the lead helicopter, her stride confident and authoritative. She looked about 40, brown hair pulled back neatly, wearing a black suit with an FBI badge on her chest. Her sharp eyes swept the scene, paused on Donovan, then moved to Melody and Finn. "I'm Special Agent Monica Walsh," she introduced herself, her voice carrying a cool, professional edge. "I lead the FBI Organized Crime Unit." She approached Donovan and looked him straight in the eye, assessing him. "Mr. Blackwood, we've got a lot to talk about." In the temporary room the FBI had set up right inside the warehouse, Donovan sat across from Monica Walsh. A cold metal table stood between them, and the handcuffs still bit into his wrists. Fluorescent light poured down, turning the air sharp and tense, the way interrogation rooms looked in movies. But this wasn't a movie. This was real life, and Melody and Finn's future depended on what happened in this room. Walsh opened a thick file placed in front of her, pages crowded with information about Donovan Blackwood, about the empire he'd built, about the crimes the FBI had been tracking for years. "You know I can put you away with what we already have," Walsh said, her voice calm but heavy with the force of the law. "Money laundering, extortion, threats. We have enough to give you at least 20 years. Donovan didn't look worried. He sat straight, gray eyes holding Walsh's gaze with the calm of a man who'd calculated every move in advance. "You also know what I have will let you break not only Volkov, but at least 3 other major organizations on the West Coast. I know who works for who. I know where the money runs. I know secrets you've been hunting your whole career." Walsh tilted her head, sharp eyes measuring the man in front of her. "What do you want?" "Immunity for my lesser charges. Not everything, only what can be negotiated." Donovan paused, his voice turning more serious. "Witness protection for Melody Carter and her son. Permanent, not temporary. New identities, a new life, somewhere Volkov or anyone else can't find them. Anything else. The right to see them in the future, when things settle, when it's safe." Walsh crossed her arms. "That's a big ask, Mr. Blackwood. A very big ask." "I've got something to trade," Donovan replied. "Something you'll want to hear." Then he told her. About Derek Carter. About the dead man's switch the brave accountant had built before he died. About the evidence that had been sent to the FBI 3 years earlier, right after Derek died in the staged accident. And about why the FBI had never acted. "There's a mole in the FBI," Donovan said, his voice cold as ice. "Someone intercepted Derek's evidence. Someone taking Volkov's money inside your own organization." Walsh didn't speak for a long moment. Her face showed nothing, but Donovan could see the calculation in her eyes, the weighing of possibilities. Then she pulled out her phone, called someone, and ordered a check. 10 minutes later, another agent entered and whispered something into Walsh's ear. Walsh's face went pale for a heartbeat before returning to her professional calm. "Special Agent Raymond Harris," Walsh said slowly. 20 years of service. He ran the Volkov file before I took it over. And apparently he's the one who's been blocking every piece of evidence tied to this organization for the last 3 years. Donovan nodded, not surprised. "You see, I'm not lying." Walsh looked at him, then said, "I want to meet the boy." Finn was brought in, his hand gripping his mother's tightly. He looked small and fragile in a room full of adults in black suits, but his green eyes were strangely steady. Walsh knelt to his level, her voice softening. "Finn, I hear you can understand every language. Can you tell me what you heard from the bad men?" And Finn told her. He told her about the conversation at the party, about the poisoning plan, about words like target and revenge. He told her about the highway chase, about the trap at exit 47. He told her about the attack that morning, about corrupt police, about every command he'd heard over the radios. Details that were astonishing. Accuracy that forced Walsh to keep writing without stopping. Who gave the orders? Who carried them out? Even pieces of dialogue no one would have believed anyone could understand. Extraordinary ability, Walsh murmured when Finn finished. She stood and looked at Donovan with an expression that wasn't the same as before. The hostility of law enforcement facing a criminal was gone. In its place was reluctant respect. Deal accepted, Walsh said. Take his cuffs off. The handcuffs dropped to the floor with a metallic clink. Donovan rubbed his wrists, then stood and walked outside to where Melody and Finn were waiting. Melody looked at him, not knowing what to say. This man, this mafia boss, this dangerous stranger she'd met less than 3 days ago, had sacrificed his freedom to protect her and her child. Why? She asked, her voice thick with emotion. You could have run. You could have left us behind. Why did you do all this? Donovan looked at her, and for the first time, the cold gray in his eyes softened in a rare way. Because the boy saved my life, and because... He paused, as if searching for the right words. Because someone has to protect the people who can't protect themselves. Finn stepped in front of Donovan and looked up at him with clear green eyes. Mr. Donovan, are you a bad man? A 6-year-old's question, simple, but deeper than anything Donovan had ever been asked. He knelt to Finn's height and looked straight into the green eyes, waiting for an answer. I've done bad things, Donovan said honestly. But I'm trying to do what's right. He paused. Do you understand? Finn nodded slowly. Like my dad, the boy said, his voice small but certain. Dad did bad things too, but he tried to do what's right to protect me and Mom, Melody cried. Tears slipped down her cheeks. But this time they weren't for grief, and they weren't for fear. They were for something warmer, something she'd thought she'd lost a long time ago. Hope. 3 months later, Melody and Finn had a new life in a quiet little coastal town in Northern California. A new name, a new identity, a new life. A small house with a white fence and a flower garden out front. Nothing like the cramped 4th-floor apartment where they used to live. Each morning, Melody woke to the distant hush of ocean waves instead of car horns and neighbors shouting through thin walls. She had a new job at a local bakery, where she learned how to make bread and pastries instead of carrying trays until 2 in the morning. The owner was a kind elderly woman who never asked about Melody's past, only cared that Melody had capable hands and a warm smile for the customers. Finn went to a new school where no one knew he was a witness to anything at all. He made friends with other ordinary children, played soccer in the afternoons, and did his homework at night. His special ability was still there, but now it was only a small secret between mother and son, no longer a burden or a danger. One evening, while they were eating dinner, the news on television reported the largest organized crime case in FBI history. Viktor Volkov had been sentenced to life in prison without parole for a long list of crimes, from money laundering to murder. His network had been dismantled across 5 countries. Dozens of senior operatives had been arrested and prosecuted. Special Agent Raymond Harris, the mole inside the FBI, had been sentenced to 20 years in prison for treason and obstruction of justice. And Derek Carter, who had died 3 years earlier in a staged accident, had been posthumously awarded a medal for his sacrifice in the name of justice. His name was spoken as a quiet hero, a man who'd traded his life to gather evidence against one of the most dangerous criminal organizations in the world. Melody cried as she watched that report. Tears ran down her cheeks, but this time they were tears of closure, of peace. Derek had finally been recognized. His sacrifice hadn't been meaningless, and she, at last, could let go. On an ordinary afternoon a few weeks later, Finn was playing in the backyard when he suddenly ran inside, eyes shining. Mom, someone's here. Melody stepped to the front door, and she stopped cold. Donovan Blackwood stood there beside an ordinary rented car. No black suit, no bodyguards, none of the frightening coldness of a mafia boss. Just a man in a gray shirt, holding a small gift, looking like any normal visitor stopping by a neighbor's home. I won't stay long, he said before Melody could ask anything. I just wanted to say goodbye the right way. Finn ran out, his face lighting up when he saw the man who'd protected him and his mother through their darkest days. Mr. Donovan. Donovan knelt and handed the gift to the boy. Finn opened it and found a thick book inside, titled The Languages of the World, History and Culture. So you can keep developing your ability, Donovan said, his voice warmer than Melody had ever heard it. One day you'll use it to help a lot of people, not as a weapon, but as a bridge that connects human beings to one another. Finn hugged the book to his chest as if it were treasure. Donovan stood and turned to Melody. You deserve to be happy, he said. And so does the boy. What about you? Melody asked. I'm learning how to find my own happiness. A moment of silence passed between them. Not romantic love like in fairy tales, but respect, gratitude, and maybe a promise that didn't need words. If you need me, Donovan said as he walked toward the car. I'll always be here. He drove away, but before he turned off the road, he looked back once. And Melody saw those gray eyes, for the first time, holding something warm. Finn opened the book, and a small photograph slipped out. A picture of the three of them, Donovan, Melody, and Finn, at the safe house by the bay, in a rare, peaceful moment in the middle of the storm. On the back of the photo was a handwritten line. Family isn't always blood. Sometimes it's the people you choose to protect. Finn looked up at his mother. Mom, will Mr. Donovan come back? Melody smiled, her eyes following the road where the car had disappeared. Maybe. Someday. She didn't know the real answer. But for the first time in many years, the future wasn't something to fear. Whatever came, they would face it, and they wouldn't be alone. This story brings us many valuable lessons about life. First is the power of courage, when a 6-year-old boy dares to do what's right even when facing danger. Second is the love parents have for their children, a love that can make someone willing to sacrifice everything, the way Derek did. And finally, the story reminds us that people can change, that even those who've lost their way can still choose to do what's right when the crucial moment arrives. Thank you for following this story all the way to the end. How do you feel about Melody, Finn, and Donovan's journey? Have you ever faced moments in life when you had to make a difficult decision to protect the people you love? Share your feelings in the comments below. We truly want to hear the thoughts that come from the deepest part of your heart. If you enjoyed this story, please hit the like button and share the video with those you know who love emotional and dramatic stories. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you won't miss our compelling stories every day from us. We wish all of you watching this video good health, a joyful life, and days filled with peace and happiness. Goodbye, and see you again in the next video.